There are two types of people in this world. Those who appreciate the majesty of a 12-foot animated reindeer named Rudolph II, capable of illuminating a synchronized light show visible from the International Space Station, and those who deserve to live in a dark, damp cave. My neighbor, Brenda, falls firmly, aggressively, and vocally into the latter category. I was sitting in my living room, the command center, as I liked to call it during the month of December. It was a Tuesday, roughly 7:15 p.m. I had a mug of hot cocoa in one hand, extra marshmallows because I'm a grown man and I do what I want, and the remote to my custom-built light controller in the other. Outside, the world was a canvas of suburban mediocrity, but my yard? My yard was the Louvre. I had spent the better part of 3 weekends in November risking life and limb on an icy ladder to ensure that 40,000 LED bulbs were perfectly aligned. The centerpiece, of course, was Rudolph II. He wasn't just a decoration. He was an animatronic marvel I'd modified with a deeper head-nodding motor and a nose that glowed with the intensity of a dying star. I took a sip of cocoa, savoring the sugar rush, and looked out the bay window. The show was running on Sequence Delta, a slow, majestic fade between icy blues and warm whites, set to a low-frequency broadcast of Trans-Siberian Orchestra that played over a dedicated FM frequency. It was beautiful. It was perfect. It was the only thing keeping the crushing weight of my seasonal depression at bay. And then in the blink of an eye, the universe went dark. It wasn't a flicker. It wasn't a brownout. It was a hard cut. 1 second, my front lawn looked like the Vegas Strip. The next, it was a black void. The silence that followed was deafening. Even the hum of the transformer box, a sound I had come to find soothing, was gone. "Honey?" My wife, Sarah, called from the kitchen. "Did you trip the breaker again? I told you running the toaster and the Griswold display at the same time was a fire hazard." "I didn't trip anything," I yelled back, already scrambling out of my recliner. "The toaster wasn't even on. That was a catastrophic failure. That was a grid-level event." I rushed to the garage, my heart pounding in my ears. I threw open the breaker panel, fully expecting to see the main switch flipped to the off position, or maybe the distinct scorch marks of a blown fuse. But when I shined my phone's flashlight onto the panel, everything was perfectly normal. Every switch was live. The house lights were still on. The fridge was humming. It was just the yard. A cold pit formed in my stomach. A breaker tripping is an accident. A specific circuit failing without tripping the breaker? That's suspicious. But a sudden, complete cessation of power to an external grid that runs on 4 separate heavy-duty extension cords, that's something else entirely. I grabbed my heavy coat, shoved my feet into my boots without bothering to tie them, and grabbed the heavy-duty mag light I kept by the door for tactical situations, which usually involved raccoons getting into the trash. I marched out the front door, the freezing December air slapping me in the face. My breath plumed out in front of me like dragon smoke. The yard was eerily dark. The snow, usually sparkling under the glow of 40,000 bulbs, looked gray and lifeless. I crunched through the snow, tracing the line of the main power trunk, a thick, orange, industrial-grade extension cord that ran from the garage outlet, snake-wound under the azalea bushes, and plugged into the central distribution hub near Rudolph's front left hoof. I reached the hub and aimed the flashlight beam down. "No," I whispered. "No, no, no." It wasn't a failure. It wasn't a defect. The orange cord, rated for sub-zero temperatures and heavy amperage, had been severed. It wasn't chewed by a squirrel. Squirrels don't leave clean diagonal cuts that shear through copper wire and thick rubber insulation in a single stroke. This was mechanical. This was a tool. I knelt down, picking up the 2 ends of the cord. The copper was gleaming, fresh and bright against the darkness. Someone had walked onto my property, navigated the maze of inflatables, and deliberately assassinated my holiday spirit. I stood up, gripping the severed cord in my hand like a dead snake, and I felt a rage building in my chest that was hot enough to melt the snow around my boots. I scanned the darkness. "Who's out there?" I shouted, swinging the flashlight beam across the street. "Show yourself, you coward! You don't mess with a man's voltage!" and then I heard it. A distinct, self-satisfied snip-snip sound. I swung the light to the left, toward the property line that separated my slice of paradise from the abyss of beige siding next door. The beam cut through the darkness and landed squarely on a figure standing on the adjacent porch. It was Brenda. She was wearing a floral quilted jacket that looked like it had been upholstered from a grandmother's sofa, and she was holding a pair of long-handled gardening shears. The metal blades glinted under my flashlight beam. She didn't look guilty. She didn't look scared. She looked triumphant. "Turn that light off, Dave," she called out, her voice possessing that nasally, scratching chalkboard quality that could curdle milk. "You're blinding me." I didn't lower the light. If anything, I intensified my grip on the mag light. I marched toward the fence, the snow crunching violently under my boots. "Brenda," I said, my voice trembling with suppressed fury. "Did you just cut my power cord?" She smirked. Actually smirked. She leaned against her porch railing, twirling the shears like a gunslinger. "I pruned a weed, Dave. An unsightly, noisy, electric weed." "A weed?" I stopped at the fence line, staring up at her. "That is a 14-gauge, outdoor-rated, weather-resistant power cable. That is the jugular vein of Christmas. You can't just cut my property." "It was encroaching," she said, waving a hand dismissively. The hum, Dave, it's incessant. I'm trying to align my chakras in the living room, and all I can hear is that low-frequency buzzing coming from your ridiculous deer. It's disrupting the energy flow of my entire downstairs." "The energy flow?" I sputtered. "Brenda, the only energy flow you need to worry about is the electricity you just illegally severed. Do you have any idea how much that cord costs? Do you have any idea how long it takes to wire Rudolph?" "He's tacky," she shot back, dropping the pseudo-spiritual act instantly. "He's tacky. He's too bright, and he nods his head like he's having a seizure. I did the neighborhood a favor. The Johnsons 3 doors down were talking about it just yesterday. I'm merely the one brave enough to take action." "The Johnsons love Rudolph," I yelled. "Their kid calls him Rudy." "You're lying, Brenda. You're just miserable because your kids didn't visit for Thanksgiving, and you're taking it out on my animatronics." Her eyes narrowed. I'd struck a nerve. Good. "You listen to me," she hissed, pointing the shears at me. "That light display is a nuisance. It flashes into my master bedroom. It's basically psychological warfare. If you fix it, I'll cut it again. I have plenty of free time, Dave. Do you? Do you have time to rewire your little toy every single night after you get home from your soul-sucking job?" I stared at her. The audacity was breathtaking. It was almost impressive in a twisted, sociopathic way. She was holding me hostage. She was threatening a war of attrition over holiday lights. "You're trespassing," I said, trying to keep my voice level. "You came onto my lawn." "My arm extended over the property line," she said with a shrug. "Technically, your cord was leaning toward my airspace. It was self-defense." "Self-defense against a festive reindeer?" "Against visual assault," she shouted. "Now go inside, take down the deer, and let us all get some sleep. If I see that thing light up again, I won't just cut the cord. I'll prune the wiring inside the deer itself. Don't test me, Dave. I'm on the HOA board now. I have powers you can't even comprehend." She turned around, the shears snapping shut one last time for emphasis, and walked into her house. The door slammed shut, and the lock clicked with a finality that echoed in the cold night air. I stood there in the dark, shivering, holding the dead wire. I looked back at Rudolph II. He looked so sad in the moonlight, his head bowed, his nose dark. I could have called the cops right then. I really could have. Vandalism, destruction of property, trespassing. But I knew how that would go. The cops in our town were mostly concerned with speeding tickets and teenagers skateboarding behind the abandoned mall. They'd come out, take a report, tell Brenda to play nice, and leave. Brenda would wait 2 weeks, then pour bleach on my lawn, or report me for having my trash cans out 10 minutes too early. No. The legal system was too slow. Too clumsy for a surgeon of chaos like Brenda. She wanted a war? She wanted to talk about energy flow? I looked down at the severed copper wires in my hand. They were frayed, exposed, vulnerable, but they were also conductive. A dark, cold idea began to form in the back of my mind. It started as a whisper, then grew into a roar. Brenda had used shears, metal shears. She had touched the wire while it was live. The only reason she wasn't sporting an afro right now was because the breaker had tripped the instant she cut through both the hot and neutral wires simultaneously, creating a short. She had gotten lucky. But luck runs out. She said she would cut it again. She promised she would touch my equipment again. I dropped the cord into the snow and turned back towards the house. I wasn't going to fix the cord tonight. I had planning to do. I had research to conduct. I walked back inside, stomping the snow off my boots. Sarah was standing in the hallway, looking concerned. "Dave, what happened? Was it the breaker?" I looked at her, and I must have had a look in my eye that was somewhere between serial killer and startup CEO, because she took a half step back. "No," I said calmly. "It wasn't the breaker. It was Brenda." "Brenda?" Sarah sighed, rubbing her temples. "What did she do now? Did she leave another note about the color of our mulch?" "She cut the main line," I said, unzipping my coat. "She walked up with shears and assassinated Rudolph." "Oh my God," Sarah gasped. "Is she crazy? She could have electrocuted herself." I paused. A slow, terrifying smile spread across my face. "Yes," I said softly. "She could have, but she didn't, not this time." "Dave," Sarah said, her voice taking on a warning tone. "Dave, what are you thinking?" "I know that face. That's the face you made when the dealership wouldn't honor the warranty on the transmission. Do not do anything illegal." "I'm not going to do anything illegal, honey," I said, walking past her toward my office. "I'm going to focus on home security, property protection. Brenda is right about one thing. We have a vulnerability, and I intend to patch it." I went into my office and sat down at my computer. I didn't open my email. I didn't open Netflix. I opened a new browser window and typed 4 words into the search bar. High-voltage livestock fencer. The search results populated instantly. Keeps cattle in, keeps predators out. Pulse technology. Safe but effective deterrent. I clicked on a link for a model called the Thundershock 3000. The description promised a memorable psychological barrier for stubborn bulls and aggressive bears. "Perfect," I whispered. But I couldn't do this alone. I knew basic wiring. I could splice a cord and change a dimmer switch, but what I was planning, this required finesse. This required a professional who knew the gray areas of the National Electric Code better than he knew his own children's birthdays. I picked up my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found the name. Sparky. Do not call unless emergency. Sparky was a licensed contractor, an electrician, and a man who had once wired a hot tub for me in exchange for a case of bourbon and a brisket smoker. He was the kind of guy who looked at a blueprint and saw only suggestions. I hit the call button. It rang 3 times. "Yeah?" a gravelly voice answered. It sounded like he was eating gravel while smoking a cigar. "Sparky," I said. "It's Dave. I have a situation." "Is your house on fire?" "No." "Did the feds find the panel I installed in the basement?" "No, it's Brenda. She cut the cord on the Christmas display." There was a long silence on the other end. Then a sigh. "The one with the chakras?" "The one with the chakras." "What do you want me to do, Dave? I can't fix stupid. And I ain't cutting her brake lines. I'm on probation." "I don't want you to cut anything," I said, leaning closer to the phone. "I want to upgrade my system. I'm looking at the Thundershock 3000 agricultural fencer. I need to know how to integrate it into a standard 120-volt holiday display without blowing up the neighborhood transformer or killing the Amazon delivery guy." "You want to electrify a reindeer?" Sparky asked. His tone wasn't judgmental. It was purely professional curiosity. "I want to protect my property," I corrected. "I want to ensure that if anyone, unauthorized, attempts to service my wiring with metal shears again, they receive immediate, tactile feedback regarding their poor life choices." Sparky chuckled. It was a dry, raspy sound. "Tactile feedback. I like that. Look, legally I can't hook up a booby trap. That's a felony. A fun one, but a felony. It's not a booby trap, I insisted. It's a perimeter fence. For rabbits. Big floral jacket-wearing rabbits. I just need you to help me with the grounding. Phoy! And maybe sell me some signage. We have to be compliant. Compliant, Sparky mused. All right. I'm free tomorrow morning. Have the coffee ready. And Dave? Yeah? Don't buy the 3,000. Buy the 5,000. It has a wet weather mode. Given the snow, you're going to want that extra conductivity. I hung up the phone. I looked out the window at the dark, lifeless yard. Sleep well, Brenda, I whispered, because tomorrow, we're going electric. The next morning the air was crisp. The sky was a piercing blue, and the sound of a diesel engine rattling apart in my driveway heralded the arrival of the cavalry. I opened the front door to see Sparky's van, a white Ford Econoline that had seen better decades, idling at the curb. The side of the van said, Sparky's Electric and Septic. We deal with all kinds of S__T, which I always felt was a bold marketing strategy for a suburban area. Sparky climbed out. He was a man shaped like a beer keg, wearing Carhartt overalls that were stiff with grease and drywall dust. He had a tool belt that probably weighed more than my daughter, and he was chewing on a toothpick with menacing intent. Morning, killer, he grunted, walking up the driveway. He didn't look at me. He was looking at the severed cord I had left marked with a little orange flag in the snow. Morning, Sparky, I said, handing him a travel mug of black coffee. Thanks for coming on short notice. He took a sip, grimaced, and nodded. Good brew. Okay, show me the damage. We walked over to Rudolph II. Sparky crouched down, his knees popping like gunfire, and inspected the cut. Clean, he noted. She used leverage, probably ratchet shears. She's got decent grip strength for a harpy. She's persistent, I said. So, here's the plan. I picked up the unit this morning. I pulled the box out from behind my back. The Thunder Shock 5000. The box featured a picture of a very surprised-looking bull and a lightning bolt graphic that looked straight out of a 1980s heavy metal album cover. Sparky took the box, turning it over in his massive hands. You know this puts out about 10,000 volts, right? Low amperage, so it won't stop her heart, but it pulses every 1.5 seconds. It feels like getting punched in the funny bone by Mike Tyson. Perfect, I said. How do we rig it? Sparky stood up and scratched his beard. Okay, here's the gray area we're living in. If you just wire this to the deer, you're liable. That's a trap. But if you are setting up a protective enclosure for your valuable animatronics, and the wiring happens to use the decoration's frame as a conductor for said enclosure, and you post the legally required signage, well, then you're just a man protecting his assets. I have the signs, I said. I bought 6. Good. Now, we gotta talk grounding. This thing needs a solid earth ground, or the pulse won't complete the circuit when she touches it. The snow helps, water is conductive, but we need to drive a rod. For the next 2 hours, my front yard became a construction site. Sparky was a virtuoso. He didn't just twist wires, he orchestrated them. We drove a 4-foot copper grounding rod into the flower bed, hidden behind a snowman. We ran a dedicated insulated line from the charger, lines, which we hid inside a fake hollow rock, specifically designed to hide house keys, but now housing a high-voltage agriculture engine. The genius part was the integration. Sparky stripped the main power feed to the lights, the one she had cut, and repaired it. But he also wove a secondary, barely visible filament wire, the hot wire from the fencer, around the thick insulation of the main cord. It looked like part of the decoration, a sparkly silver twist meant to make the cord look festive. Here's the beauty of it, Sparky said, wiping grease on his pants. The lights will work normal, 120 volts AC doing their job. But that silver wrap, that's carrying the pulse. She doesn't even have to cut it. She just has to grab the cord to steady it before she cuts. As soon as her skin touches that silver wrap, zap. And if she uses insulated cutters? I asked, worried. The pulse will jump, Sparky said with a grin. "If she gets within a millimeter of that wire with metal blades, the arc will jump to the metal. It'll scare the living hell out of her, even if it doesn't shock her directly. But knowing her type, she's gonna grab it. They always grab it. They think they own the physical world." We finished up around noon. The setup was invisible to the untrained eye. To anyone walking by, it just looked like I had repaired the cord and added some extra sparkly ribbon. But then came the most important part. The warning. "Put 'em up," Sparky commanded. I took the bright yellow signs I'd bought. "Danger, high voltage, electric fence, do not touch." I placed one right at the property line, facing Brenda's house. I placed another one directly on Rudolph's chest, like a necklace. I placed a third one on the cord itself, hanging like a little flag. "It looks aggressive," I noted. "It looks legal," Sparky corrected. "You warned her. If she ignores a sign that literally says electric fence, that's on her. You can't fix illiterate either." Sparky packed up his tools. I handed him a check and a frozen brisket I'd pulled from the chest freezer. "Pleasure doing business, Dave," he said, climbing into his van. "Call me when the cops show up. I want to hear the audio." "You think they'll come?" "Oh, they'll come," he laughed, firing up the engine. "But you're good. Just stick to the script. It's a livestock fencer for pest control. The pest just happens to be 5'4" and wear polyester." He drove off, leaving a cloud of black smoke. I stood alone in the yard, looking at my masterpiece. It was armed. It was dangerous. It was festive. I went inside to wait. The afternoon dragged on. I checked the window every 10 minutes. I saw Brenda come out once to get her mail. She paused, looking at the yellow signs. She squinted. She actually laughed. I saw her shoulders shake. She thought it was a joke. She thought I was trying to scare her with plastic signs. "Oh, Brenda," I thought, sipping my fourth coffee. "Hubris was the downfall of the Greeks, and it will be the downfall of the HOA." At 4:30 p.m., the doorbell rang. I checked the camera. It was Bob, the HOA president. Of course, Brenda had called in the heavy artillery. I opened the door. Bob was wearing a windbreaker with the HOA logo embroidered on the breast. He held a clipboard. He always held a clipboard. I wasn't sure if he slept with it. "Dave," Bob said, not making eye contact, instead staring at the siding of my house. "Bob," I replied cheerfully. "To what do I owe the pleasure? Here to compliment the symmetry of the candy canes?" "We've had a complaint," Bob said, tapping his pen on the clipboard. "Regarding signage. You have posted high-voltage signs. They are not approved decor. They clash with the neighborhood aesthetic. Section 4, paragraph 2. No non-seasonal signage permitted?" "Ah," I said, leaning against the doorframe. "Actually, Bob, those aren't decorations. Those are liability warnings, required by state law." Bob blinked. "Excuse me?" "I upgraded the system," I lied smoothly, "because of the vandalism last night. You heard Brenda cut my cord, right? I had to install a heavier-duty power distribution system. It carries a significant load. My contractor said that under State Statute 33B, if I have exposed high-capacity wiring, I must post warnings to prevent accidental injury. You wouldn't want the HOA to be liable if a kid touched it and got a boo-boo, would you?" Bob paled slightly at the word liable. It was the kryptonite of all HOA presidents. They feared lawsuits more than death. "Well," Bob stammered, I suppose safety comes first, but Brenda says they are threatening." "They are only threatening if you plan to touch my property, Bob," I said, my voice dropping an octave. "Is Brenda planning to touch my property again?" I can't speak for Brenda," Bob said, backing away. "Just try to make them look festive? Maybe put a bow on the sign?" "I'll see what I can do, Bob." He retreated down the walkway, round one to Dave. Darkness fell at 5 p.m. I turned on the system. The lights blazed to life. Rudolph nodded his head. The TSO music began to play softly on the radio. And underneath it all, invisible to the naked ear, was the rhythmic tick-tick-tick of the Thunder Shock 5000, sending a pulse of pure justice through the perimeter wire. I set up my station in the living room. I turned off the lights in the house so I wouldn't be seen. I had a clear view of the yard. I set up a tripod with my DSLR camera set to video mode. I had popcorn. 6 p.m. Nothing. 7 p.m. Nothing. 8 p.m. The suspense was killing me. Maybe she wouldn't do it. Maybe the signs actually worked. 9:30 p.m. The street was quiet. Most neighbors had turned their lights off, but I kept mine on. I needed the bait to be irresistible. And then movement. Her front door opened. A sliver of light spilled onto the snow. Brenda stepped out. She wasn't wearing the floral jacket tonight. She was in a bathrobe, a thick pink terrycloth thing, and slippers. She looked tired, she looked annoyed, and in her right hand, gleaming in the reflection of my twinkling lights, were the shears. My heart hammered against my ribs. "Here we go," I whispered. I hit record on the camera. She walked with purpose this time. She didn't look around. She marched straight to the fence line. She stepped over the property line. She ignored the first sign. She literally stepped on the sign I had placed on the ground. She approached Rudolph. The lights were blinking in a chaotic pattern now. I had switched it to strobe mode, just to ensure maximum irritation. She stood over the cord. She looked down at the danger sign hanging on the wire. Sadrad. She reached out with her free hand to grab the sign and rip it off. "Don't do it, Brenda," I whispered to the empty room. "Read the sign." She didn't read it. She grabbed the wire to steady it, preparing to bring the shears down with her other hand. Her hand closed around the silver-wrapped cord. The reaction was instantaneous. It wasn't a scream. It was a noise that sounded like a cat being stepped on by a bagpipe. Zip! Brenda's body went rigid. The pulse hit her. Her arm flew back as if she'd been yanked by an invisible rope. The shears went airborne, flying backwards over her shoulder and landing in the snow with a dull thump. She didn't fall. She did a sort of river dance shuffle, her slippers losing traction on the ice. She flailed, her arms windmilling, trying to process the sudden influx of 10,000 volts to her nervous system. "Yay! Ow! She scrambled backward, slipping, falling onto her butt in the snow. She stared at the wire, eyes wide, chest heaving. She looked at her hand. She looked at the deer. Rudolph nodded at her slowly. I couldn't help it. I burst out laughing. It was a deep, guttural belly laugh that had been building for years. But the night wasn't over. Brenda scrambled to her feet, clutching her hand. She turned toward my house, her face twisted in a mask of pure fury. "You maniac!" she screamed at my dark window. "You booby-trapped the reindeer!" She pulled a phone out of her robe pocket. She dialed 3 numbers. I knew exactly who she was calling. "Good," I said, taking a handful of popcorn. "Bring them on!" The wait for the police was the longest 20 minutes of my life, not because I was afraid, but because I had to refrain from going outside and gloating. It takes a tremendous amount of willpower to sit on a velvet armchair while your nemesis is weeping into a snowbank. But I managed. I poured a fresh cup of coffee. I checked the camera angle. I made sure the danger signs were still clearly illuminated by the strobe lights of Rudolph. Then, the neighborhood exploded in blue and red. It wasn't just one squad car. Brenda must have used the words bomb, trap, or terrorist on the 911 call because 3 cruisers screeched onto our quiet cul-de-sac from different directions. They parked at odd angles, blocking my driveway, Brenda's driveway, and the fire hydrant that Mr. Peterson usually let his dog pee on. Doors flew open, officers spilled out, hands resting on their holsters. It looked like a raid. "Stay here," I told Sarah. She was peeking through the blinds, looking pale. "Dave, please don't get arrested," she whispered. "Who will drive the carpool?" "Nobody is getting arrested," I said, zipping up my coat. "This is a civil dispute involving high-amperage agricultural equipment. It's a zoning issue at best." I walked to the front door, took a deep breath, and stepped out onto the porch. The scene was chaotic. Brenda was standing in the middle of the street, still in her pink bathrobe, gesturing wildly at a young officer who looked like he had graduated from the academy about 45 minutes ago. 2 other officers were shining flashlights at my house, specifically at Rudolph, who continued to nod his head rhythmically, indifferent to the law enforcement presence. "He tried to kill me!" Brenda shrieked, pointing a shaking finger at me as I emerged. "That man is a psycho. He wired the deer to the main grid. I touched it, and it threw me across the yard." The young officer, whose name tag read Deborah Miller, looked up at me. He looked exhausted. "Sir, step down off the porch and keep your hands visible." I descended the steps slowly, putting on my best, confused suburban dad face. "Is everything all right, officer? I saw the lights. Is there a gas leak?" "Don't play dumb, Dave!" Brenda screamed. "Show them the torture device. Show them the electric chair you built for my cats." "Ma'am, please lower your voice," Miller said, holding up a hand. A second officer, older, with a mustache that commanded respect, walked over. This was clearly the supervisor. His tag read Sergeant Kowalski. "Sir," Kowalski said, his voice gravelly and calm, "your neighbor alleges that she was electrocuted by your holiday display. Care to explain why your reindeer is apparently weaponized?" I looked at Kowalski. I looked at Brenda. I looked at the wire cutters lying in the snow where she had dropped them. "Officer," I said calmly, "I experienced some vandalism last night. Someone cut the power cords to my display. In response, I hired a licensed contractor to upgrade my wiring and install a security perimeter to prevent further damage. It's a standard agricultural fencing unit, perfectly legal." "Agricultural?" Kowalski raised an eyebrow. "You farming cattle in this subdivision, son?" "I'm farming joy," I said. "But there are pests, large wire-cutting pests." Brenda let out a sound like a deflating tire. "He called me a pest. Officer, arrest him! I have burns!" "Look at my hand." She shoved her hand into Miller's face. The officers turned their flashlights onto her palm. There was, admittedly, a very small red mark. It looked like a mosquito bite. "It tingles," she wailed. "I can feel my heart skipping beats. I need a paramedic." "Call the EMTs for her," Kowalski sighed to Miller. Then he turned back to me. "Okay, let's look at this setup, because if you rigged a booby trap, you're going downtown. You can't just electrify a lawn ornament." "It's not a booby trap," I insisted, leading them toward the display. "It's a clearly marked, passive defensive barrier. Please observe the signage." We walked over to Rudolph. The snow was trampled where Brenda had done her electric slide. I pointed to the bright yellow sign that was glowing under the police flashlights. "Danger, high voltage, electric fence. Do not touch." Kowalski leaned in. He adjusted his glasses. He read the sign out loud. Then he read the one on the deer's chest. Then he looked at the one on the ground that Brenda had stepped on. "You have signs," Kowalski noted. "I do," I said. "And, officer, if you look closely at the cord," I pointed to the silver-wrapped wire, "you'll see it's distinct from the lighting. It's a separate system. You have to grab it to get shocked. You have to ignore 3 signs and physically grab the wire." Kowalski shone his light on the snow. The beam landed on the heavy-duty shears. "And those?" Kowalski asked, gesturing to the tool. "Those aren't mine," I said. Kowalski walked over and picked up the shears with a gloved hand. He inspected the blades. "There's a notch in the metal here. Looks like arc pitting. Someone tried to cut a live wire." He turned to Brenda, who was now being attended to by 2 paramedics who looked bored out of their minds. They were checking her pulse. She was telling them she could see a white light. "Ma'am," Kowalski called out, "are these your shears?" Brenda froze. The paramedics stopped checking her pulse. The neighbors, who had gathered on their porches in a sea of bathrobes and fleece jackets, went silent. Brenda stammered. I was pruning." "Pruning?" Kowalski asked, walking over to her. "At 11:30 at night? In the snow? In your neighbor's yard?" "The cord was encroaching," Brenda pivoted. "It was vibrating. It was disturbing my peace. I have a right to abate a nuisance." "You don't have a right to trespass and vandalize property," Kowalski said. Chowan, his tone shifting from investigative to authoritative. "And you certainly don't have a right to complain about getting shocked by a fence that is labeled high voltage while you are attempting to destroy it with conductive metal tools. You're lucky you're not dead, ma'am." "But he shocked me!" she shrieked. "That's assault?" "No, ma'am," Kowalski said, shaking his head. "Assault is if he chased you with a cattle prod. If you climb a barbed wire fence and cut yourself, you don't sue the farmer. You read the sign." Brenda stood there, mouth open, looking like a fish that had been slapped onto a dock. She looked at the neighbors. The Johnsons were snickering. Mr. Peterson gave me a thumbs up. "I want to press charges," she insisted. "You can try," Kowalski said. "But I'm writing this up as criminal trespass and attempted criminal mischief on your part. If you want to push it, I can take you in right now. We have a nice warm cell where the lights don't blink." The color drained from Brenda's face. The paramedics packed up their bag. "He's fine," the paramedic said to Kowalski. "Heart rate is elevated, likely due to rage, but no arrhythmia. Slight superficial burn on the index finger. She'll live." Kowalski turned to me. He walked close, turning off his flashlight so it was just the two of us in the shadow of the strobe lighting reindeer. "Look," he said quietly. "Between you and me. Funny as hell. I have an HOA president who measures my grass with a ruler. I get it." "Thank you," I whispered. "But," he continued, his voice stern, "turn it off. Tonight? You made your point. If a kid touches this, or a dog, or the mailman, you're toast. Signs or no signs, the city doesn't like electrified suburbs. Take the fence charger off tomorrow." "Understood," I said. "The message has been delivered." "Good." Kowalski turned back to the street. "All right, folks, show's over. Go back to Netflix. Nothing to see here except bad decisions." He handed Brenda her shears. "Stay off his lawn, ma'am. Next time I come out here, someone is leaving in cuffs, and I don't think it's going to be the guy with the Christmas spirit." The police packed up. The lights faded. The sirens chirped once as they drove away. Brenda stood alone in the street for a moment, clutching her shears. She looked at me. I looked at her. I raised my coffee mug in a silent toast. She turned around, marched into her house, and slammed the door so hard I felt the vibration through my boots. I walked back inside. Sarah was sitting on the couch, holding a pillow like a shield. "Well?" she asked. "We won," I said, locking the door. "And we're keeping the lights." The next morning, the neighborhood felt different. There was a shift in the atmospheric pressure. The tyranny of Brenda had been broken, shattered by a 10,000 volt pulse of reality. I went out early, around 7 a.m., to dismantle the weaponized portion of the display as per Sergeant Kowalski's instructions. I disconnected the Thundershock 5000, coiled up the grounding wire, and removed the yellow signs. I left Rudolph, though. He looked proud. He looked like a veteran who had seen combat. As I was coiling the wire, Mr. Johnson from 3 doors down walked by with his golden retriever. He stopped. "Morning, Dave," he said. "Morning, Bill. Hear things got a little sparky last night." I grinned. "You could say that. Just doing some maintenance." Bill chuckled. "You know, she measured my trash cans last week. Said they were 3 inches too far from the curb. Threatened to fine me $50. "Is that so?" "Yeah. Saw her this morning, though. She was getting her paper. She had a bandage on her finger." "Occupational hazard," I said. "She didn't say a word to me," Bill said, his smile widening. "Usually she yells about the dog. Today she just looked at the ground and scurried inside. You did the Lord's work, Dave." "Merry Christmas, Bill." "Merry Christmas, Dave." The rest of the month was bliss. Absolute, unadulterated bliss. Brenda went dark. Her blinds stayed drawn. She stopped patrolling the neighborhood with her clipboard. The rumor mill, which was usually fueled by her, turned against her. The story of the electric reindeer grew with each retelling. By the time it reached the end of the block, the story was that I had installed a laser grid, and Brenda had been thrown into a snowbank by a kinetic blast. I didn't correct anyone, but the real victory came 2 days before Christmas. I was outside checking the bulbs. Just standard checking, no high voltage involved, when a white van pulled up. It wasn't Sparky this time. It was a delivery truck. The driver hopped out, carrying a massive package. He looked at the address, then at my house. "Package for Brenda. Last name starts with K?" he asked, squinting at the label. "Next door," I said, pointing to the dark house. "But be careful. She's not fond of people on her lawn." The driver shrugged and walked up Brenda's driveway. I watched as he rang the doorbell. Nothing. He rang again. Finally, the door cracked open. I saw Brenda. She looked diminished, defeated. "Sign here, please," the driver said. She reached out with her right hand to take the stylus. I saw the bandage on her index finger. She flinched as she tried to grip the pen. She signed awkwardly, took the package, and looked up. Her eyes met mine across the snowy expanse of our yards. For a second, I thought she might yell. I thought she might threaten to sue. I thought she might throw the package at me, but she didn't. She just looked at Rudolph, then at me, then down at her hand. She gave a curt, stiff nod, a surrender, and went back inside. I stood there for a moment, the cold wind biting at my cheeks, feeling a warmth that had nothing to do with the temperature. I had defended my castle. I had protected the holiday spirit. I had used the laws of physics to defeat the laws of the HOA. I walked over to Rudolph and patted his plastic flank. "Good boy," I whispered. That night, for the first time in years, I slept soundly. The lights outside hummed their gentle, electric song, casting a glow over the snow. And in the silence of the suburbs, peace reigned. Until next year. I heard she's thinking about complaining about my 4th of July fireworks. Let her try. I know a guy who sells extensive sprinkler systems.